Our next speaker is Geena Pham. Please welcome her.
Firstly, I want to thank Christine and Franny for setting up this event and for allowing me a safe space to share my story. Every day, when the homeroom bell rings and the loudspeaker crackles, I stand up and recite the Pledge of Allegiance with my students. We all know how it goes, and we all know how it ends. One nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. For all, for my white students, the black and brown ones, the ones that look like me. As we have seen in the events that erupted these past couple of weeks, this past year, these past several years, we are not one. We are surely divisible, and liberty and justice definitely do not serve all. My name is Geena Pham, and I'm a 7th grade English teacher in suburban Massachusetts. I am one of just 3 Asian American teachers and staff members out of 460 total in my school district. Where I teach at the middle school, I'm not just the sole Asian American teacher, I'm also the only teacher of color in the entire building. My students do not reflect these statistics, as 20% of them are BIPOC, with 4% identifying as Asian American. When I'm with my students, I revel in their laughs and the youthful spark in their eyes. I see the light bulbs go off when they finally understand how to use a subordinating conjunction properly. I hear the naivety in their complaints about a 5-paragraph essay being too much work. They are beautiful and smart and enthusiastic, but I fear for them. I fear when one of my white students shouts out, "What kind of teacher has a BLM poster on their wall? Who will he become?" I fear when one of my black students is the only one to get reprimanded for the same offense her white classmates committed. Who will she become? I fear for one of my Asian students who has barely spoken a word throughout the entire year. My colleagues assure me, "Oh, Joey's just quiet." I worry, who will he become? I don't know, but I know who he is now. Joey is invisible, and Joey is ignored. Joey is like me and the millions of other Asian Americans in this country that have never quite belonged. For too long, we have been pushed into the background. We have been the punchlines and unoriginal jokes, the ones behind the scenes and instead of the spotlight. We have been dubbed the model minority, the group that does what it's supposed to do, the group that's quiet and respectful. And now we are the ones to be blamed for this pandemic that at its start stopped the world in its tracks. I admit that I've been part of the problem by following the narrative that this country has written for me. In moments of racial injustice in my classroom, specifically towards me, I haven't spoken up. I've kept quiet and ignored those moments like they didn't happen. I haven't corrected my colleagues when they asked for my nationality rather than my ethnicity. I haven't properly stood up for my students of color when they've needed it. And worst of all, I've kept Joey invisible. But now I'm rewriting that narrative. When a student says ching chong to me on the first day of school, I will follow up with him and ensure that he understands the bigger issue of racism rather than the be kind mantra that has been taught over and over to him. When another student tells me to go back to China, I will create a teachable moment and educate my students rather than stay quiet and ignore it as if it didn't happen. When an administrator tells me to stick to the literature, to stop getting myself into trouble, and to keep my head down after having a class discussion on a hate crime that killed 6 of my people, I will tell her that I am an educator and not a robot. I'm done being seen as a foreigner, although I was born on this soil. I'm done with my colleagues being too afraid to talk about race, even though 20% of our student population are BIPOC. I'm done with white people telling me to keep my head down. My AAPI community, we are not invisible and we are not foreigners. We are Americans. We need to stand up and speak out because we are done. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Geena, for that very moving speech.